So this is a paper that was written by someone, and it talks about, and the title is How the Presumption of Atheism by the way of a Semiotic Square of Opposition leads to a semantic collapse. This was written some time ago. It was written almost 4 years ago. So I thought I would go through it and see if my critical thinking skills are still up there or not. But it took a lot of effort on my part because it's been a while since I went through a paper properly. So I was also a bit overwhelmed in the beginning with the language, so I had to get used to the language again. And go back, open a dictionary again, and go through a lot of reminding myself of what terms mean and everything. So if you see the language here and if you're not sure what it means, don't worry, I'll try my very best to explain. If I can't, then just ask me. I'm quite sure I have something somewhere in my notes. I don't know why someone would write a paper in such complex language. You would want people to understand it, but it depends from person to person. Usually when I wrote my paper, my language would be very simple and straightforward. I'll give you a one-sentence summary of what my criticism is of this paper. But according to me, this paper is it's done a thing that it's mistaken overlap between broad categories for logical equivalence between two positions. There is a real issue here about terminology. There's a real issue here about whether broad and narrow uses of a term can create confusion. But confusion is not the same thing as collapse. And overlap is not the same thing as identity, right? It's like a Venn diagram, right? Two categories can overlap and something can fall between that overlap, right? But that doesn't mean that those two things that are overlapping are the same thing that's falling. So as I go through the paper, we will see a lot of symbolism being used and abbreviations being used and a lot of logical statements being used and a lot of logical tables being used, right? So basically, if you see a symbol S there, it's a subject. It can be a person, right? You can say B is believing in something, right? And G is God exists. That's what it's called, lowercase g. So if you see BSG, we read it as highlighting, we start with the S first, it's in the middle. So we will start with the thing that's in the middle and say S, then we'll go to the left and say S believes. Then we go to the right and it says God exists, right? S believes God exists. Middle to left to right. That's how we go, right? Then if you see BS and this little sleepy line here, it's a negation symbol and it's against G. So it's standing before G. So it's negating God exists. So it means not, or God does not exist. So, right? So as we start with S from the middle, then go to the left to the right. So it says the subject believes that the God does not exist. Same thing, negation before B. So it means not believe, right? So again, center to the left to the right, S subject does not believe that God, G, exists. And again, the negation against both B and G. So again, center to the left to the right, S does not believe, because it's not believe, S does not believe that God does not exist, right? So that's how it will go. I'll try and keep repeating it as we go. It says, defining subalternations with the same semantic term will result in a semantic collapse of terms, right? So what does subalternations mean, right? This is a one-way falls under relation. That's what subalternations means. If the stronger upper position is true, the weaker lower position must also be true, but it's not the other way around. So in simple terms, if you give the big broad boxes the same names as the smaller narrow boxes, then the person standing in the overlap gets both names, but that does not prove the positions themselves have become the same. For example, apples and oranges, two positions, they overlap somewhere, and there's a category of grapes that falls in that category. Doesn't mean that apples and oranges have become grapes. So what the abstract is doing is it's coming out swinging. In essence, it's saying that we define atheism in weak or negative case. And if subalternations are labeled with the same semantic term, then a square of opposition shows that some can be semantically atheist, theist, and agnostic at once. Now, this is a little complicated, so I'll just come down to the simpler language that I typed down later. Sorry. The first problem is that the abstract does not distinguish clearly between ambiguity, overlap, or collapse. If we read further, it says, if Flu's presumption of atheism is accepted, then that atheism should be thought of in the negative case, where subalternations for both positive atheism and negative atheisms are denoted by the same term of atheism. As I described already, subalternations don't work like that. It can be logically demonstrated by way of a semiotic square of opposition that it will effectively result in the possibility of someone concurrently being semantically an atheist, theist, and agnostic. This semantic collapse of terms lowers the axiological value of the term atheism, and as such is insufficient grounds to reject Flu's arguments. The first problem is the abstract does not distinguish clearly between what's ambiguity, what's overlap, and what's collapse. They do not define it at all. Ambiguity means that a word has more than one possible sense. Overlap means two broad categories may share some of the same cases. Collapse would mean that categories themselves have stopped doing any distinct work. The paper that what we have seen here as the abstract states, it needs to prove the strongest point, collapse. But from what I understood it, as I read through it, what it actually does is it just only establishes overlap and maybe some ambiguity. That's what it does. Suppose I use the term atheism in a broader sense than just belief that God does not exist. Right? Suppose I use it to mean not believing that God exists. That broader bucket may include more than one kind of person, yeah? It may include somebody who positively believes there is no God. It may include somebody who suspends the judgment. It's a terminology problem. It's not a logical collapse. The second problem with the abstract is this line that is there about someone being atheist, theist, and agnostic at the same time. That sounds it's dramatization, and I'm surprised that something like that has been put on a paper, but I guess it's Steve, that's up to him, right? We see later that it only works by switching some strong senses of those terms to weak umbrella senses, and then pretending that sharing an umbrella label is the same as holding the same position. He does this switch between holding position and labels, and umbrella of labels. And I think so he doesn't realize that, in my opinion. He's so lost in the functionality and the logical terms and everything and the symbolism of it. He doesn't recognize that he has switched the language. So this abstract right from the start, it's trying to set a tone of the paper in a way that it's trying to be rhetorically strong, but logically it's jumping ahead. It's trying to tell the reader that the result is going to be devastating. What it actually needs to do is to prove that categories become identical, and I don't think this paper will get there. I will try to be fair, though, that the abstract does it raises a legitimate concern, right? The concern is that if you use one word to cover both a narrow assertive position and a broader non-belief position, then the language can become blurry. As I said, confusion is not the same as as I said, terminology or confusion is not the same as logical collapse, right? So the concern would be using broad and narrow senses of the same term that can create ambiguity unless the distinction is made explicit. That would be the fair version of that concern, which is very different from saying that the terms collapse and become logically equivalent. That's very different, right? So my summary of the abstract is this, that the abstract mistakes a possible ambiguity in labeling for a demonstrated collapse of positions. That's what I'm thinking is happening here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm always happy to correct myself.